Everybody, I would like to welcome you to our special council meeting for Tuesday, April 22nd, our 5 o'clock meeting. And the purpose of this meeting is to present our 2024 asset management plan. I'd like to call this meeting to order, noting that all council members are in attendance. We do have one joining us virtually, and that is Councillor Guerin. We acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, and of the Huron-Wendat peoples. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and of all the original peoples of Turtle Island who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. Are there any declarations of conflicts of interest from members of council this evening? Seeing none, if you find yourself in conflict later, just let us know. I need a mover and a seconder to adopt the published agenda for the special council meeting for April 22nd, 2025. Moved by Councillor Mady, supported by Councillor Allard. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And we will move to reports from administration. Is there Erica is going to introduce us? Welcome, Ms. Tilley.
So through the chair, today we are joined with our hired consultant, PSD Citywide, who has prepared our 2024 asset management plan. As per OREG 588, asset management planning for municipal infrastructure, an update from the 2022 AMP was required. This included requirements for levels of service and inventory reporting for all asset categories of both core and non-core assets. With the development and acceptance of this AMP, the town of Essex will now be in compliance with Phase 2 requirements under OREG 588. There's also a Phase 3 requirement, which is currently underway and being prepared by PSD as well. I would like to introduce you to our project manager from PSD, who is joining us virtually from Alberta, Alexa. Alexa has prepared a presentation encompassing the details of the 2024 asset management plan, and we'll follow the presentation with a question and answer period. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I just want to make sure that you can hear me all right and that my screen is being shared.
And we can see the screen. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. As Erica said, my name is Alexa Wild. I am a senior asset management advisor here at PSD Citywide, and I was the primary consultant that has been working with town staff in the development of this asset management plan. So today I will be reviewing the updates that have been made for this iteration of the asset management plan in order to ensure that it meets the requirements for 2024 for the Ontario Regulation 58817. And before diving into the specifics of the town's AMP, I just wanted to provide an overview and context of the project and asset management in general. So the town of Essex and PSD Citywide have been collaborating for a number of years now, including with the previous iterations of the asset management plan. But for the current project that we are talking about today, we aim to update the AMP in compliance with the 2024 requirements. And I will talk about more about the specifics of the regulation in a later slide. I would like to thank the town staff for their cooperation and dedication as we worked through this iteration of the project, specifically to key contributors, Erica and David, although certainly other departments were involved with valuable background information. So why the need for municipal asset management? We can acknowledge that municipal infrastructure and assets are vital in order to provide services to our communities. So what we need is a way to organize what we own, a way to understand what services we provide through those assets, and a way to ensure accountability to our residents and stakeholders for the services that they do use. So these three key objectives are really the driving force behind not only the regulation, but increased awareness amongst various stakeholders and the need for asset management. So from a municipal perspective, the value of what we provide is considered a level of service. It's a high level set of parameters that we can use to determine the level of service of a particular system or network. So here on the screen, you can see that there is a three-way triangle that pulls in every direction if you change any parameters. So first we have cost. How much will it cost the town to replace or repair a given asset? And when will that cost be incurred? Performance is what is the output that you expect from that asset? Is it in good shape? Is it in poor shape? And risk. What are the potential risks of this asset failing? Who would be impacted, and how can we identify the assets that have high risks? So if you increase or decrease any of the one parameters, it will affect the other two. So for example, if you want to see a higher performance from an asset, you're probably going to have to spend a little more money, but you're probably reducing the risk of that asset failing. So with the town's asset inventory, which is what we base our asset management plan off of, we pull information from a bunch of different places. So it tends to be from TCA, which is your Financial Tangible Capital Assets Registry. We want to make sure that our assets are updated with the most recent condition assessments. We can synchronize our data with the current life cycle management strategies and risk frameworks that we're using to govern our assets. And of course, staff knowledge. Nobody knows the assets better than the people that are working with them every day. So all of these come together to accumulate into a centralized asset inventory. So as we've discussed, this is part of OREG 58817. It is legislated that all municipalities within Ontario have asset management plans. So the first iteration of the asset management plan was required in 2022, and that only required a look at core infrastructure. And by core, when we refer to core and non-core, it certainly does not mean that one is more important than the other. It's just how the province differentiates certain asset categories. So within 2022, we were only looking at core infrastructure, which included roads, bridges, water, wastewater, and stormwater. So with the 2024 iteration, we had to expand the asset management plan to include non-core assets. So that includes things like your facilities, your fleet, any land improvements. Those items, we had to do the same thing that we had done in 2022. But in addition to adding in those new assets, we also updated the previous information to make sure that we're using the latest replacement costs that we can for accurate future planning. So the 2024 requirement was due by the province July 1st, 2024. However, we have seen a quite significant proportion of municipalities in Ontario are behind on this deadline. To date, we haven't seen much impact from being late on the deadline, as the province has been quite accommodating as long as municipalities can prove that they are pushing forward and making an attempt to be in compliance. So today we will be going over the results from the 2024 asset management plan. But as Erica mentioned, we have already started moving ahead with 2025. And what the 2025 requirements are is taking all of the information from the 2024 plan, which is a current state, and looking at past performance. So how much have we spent in the past? What is the current condition of our assets? What are we currently doing to maintain those assets? And the 2025 iteration is a forward looking. So do we want to change any of our service levels? Do we want to change how much we're funding these asset categories? Do we want to change how we're managing them? So this is what we will refer to later as proposed levels of service. However, the 2024 plan is based on current levels of service. So with asset management plans, We need to update, review, and post them for the public. So after the 2025 asset management plan is completed, AMPs must be updated at least once every 5 years and passed by the municipal council. For just asset management planning in general, every municipal council shall conduct an annual review of its asset management progress on or before July 1st every year. That is another requirement of OREG 58817. And there is a requirement that the asset management policy and plan be posted on the municipal website. So upon adoption by the council, this will be posted on the website. So what is included in asset management planning? Number one is, what is the current state of municipal infrastructure? What do we own? How much is it worth? What condition is it in? Two is, are there any process improvements that can increase confidence and in the analysis and the decision making? So what can we do better on our condition assessments? Can we do better on our current costing and forecasting? And lastly is, what is the town's financial capacity to meet the long-term capital requirements? Especially because there are so many assets that take a very long time to go through their lifespan. If you think about a water main, we're expecting that to last 75 years. So when you look at an entire municipality, it can be difficult to look at those long-term figures and know when you need to spend what amount of money. So this is a snapshot of the total replacement cost of the town's asset portfolio. So if you were to replace everything you owned today in today's dollars, the town owns $1.4 billion worth of assets. That's a lot of assets to maintain and own. However, all of these assets are providing services to your residents and stakeholders. So as you can see here, your largest proportion is in your utilities. You have 380 million in sanitary sewer network assets and almost 300 million in water network assets. So one thing I do want to point out here is that in the last asset management plan from 2022, the replacement cost was indicated in that plan to be $621 million. So this is a quite substantial jump. However, there's a few reasons for that. Number one is we did add in new asset categories. So all of the non-core assets, including buildings and vehicles and heavy equipment and parks, those were all added in addition to what was reported in the last asset management plan. And also through this year's plan, we really looked to improve upon our replacement cost estimates. So there were some quite substantial jumps in unit costs for per meter of pipe to be replaced, or per square meter of road if you're repaving. And these are constantly being refined to help predict how much we should be spending in any given year. So when we looked at updating replacement costs, there's a couple different methods to updating. Our preferred method is going to be either a cost per unit or user defined. And what this means is we are looking at past projects that have been completed within the town and say, oh, okay, we replaced 300 meters of water main for this project, and that project costs this much money. We can use that data to better predict future expenditures. And user defined is either from a report for an individual asset, and what we used that for here is your bridges and culverts, which those replacement costs came directly from the provincially legislated OSIM reports. So for remaining assets that we weren't able to get accurate unit costs or have a report that says this is how much this asset costs to replace, we are using inflation. So any assets in the buildings category or vehicles that weren't able to have an immediate replacement cost, we did inflate the original purchase price to $2025 to ensure that we're having some semblance of reality, as opposed to saying, oh, well, we purchased that pickup truck for $25,000, 25 years ago. We want to make sure that we're projecting that as to today's costs. So with your overall portfolio, this is a snapshot of the overall condition of asset categories. So on the left is all of the proportion that is very good condition in green, showing the proportions all the way over to the right, which are in very poor condition. So overall, the town's assets, 64% of assets are considered to be in fair or better condition, which is a fairly average, fairly good place to be in. This is taking into account some of these assets have condition assessments. Some of them are just being estimated based on age. And where we had a previous condition assessment that maybe is a few years old, we are projecting that in combination with age to get a more realistic position as to where we are today. So within the portfolio, we did have condition assessments for quite a few of the asset categories. Like I said, anything that didn't have a condition assessment was just projected based on age. One piece of information to note is that quite a few of these condition assessments were done by staff, however, are quite dated. So some are 5 years old, some are up to 10 years old. And the longer or the further you get away from when those condition assessments were completed, the less accurate they will be. So in future iterations, when we're looking to improve on data accuracy, this is one of the key recommendations, is to improve the frequency or consistency of condition assessments moving forward. So when we're using assessed condition data in asset management decision making, it can be used to mitigate risks associated with asset failure. We can see which assets are in the poorest condition, and maybe there's an intervention that we can do to mitigate the risk of that failure. The condition data can also help us identify the most economic interventions. So examples of this might be, well, our sewer is in pretty bad shape, but it's still good enough that we could do a lining project, which is a fraction of the cost of a full replacement. Or maybe a road is, the surface is in pretty bad shape and it's pretty bumpy, but the base underneath it is still in good shape. So maybe we can extend the life by doing an overlay rather than repaving the entire street. And this data also really helps us predict when future expenditures are required. So if you're solely basing it on age, you might have an asset that's in pretty good shape, but based on age, it says it should be replaced next year. But you want to have that real-time data to say, yes or no, we should prioritize this asset. So this is a snapshot of the next 80 years. This obviously will fluctuate, and every year when administration is putting forward a capital budget, they need to look at that institutional knowledge of, well, it says we should replace this road, but it's okay, it's got a couple more years left in it. So you need to balance these system-generated forecasts with staff knowledge. But what these forecasts are really good for is indicating where should we be aiming. If we did everything in an ideal manner at the ideal time, how much would that cost us per year? So currently, if every intervention, if every replacement happened exactly on time and nothing got stretched out. So for example, if you planned to replace a pickup truck every 10 years, that pickup truck got replaced every 10 years on the dot and never got stretched out to, let's squeeze out another 2 or 3 years. That would require the town to invest $32 million a year across the asset portfolio. So based on that $32 million a year, we have put together a financial strategy. I want to give a brief comparison to the annual requirements that were projected in the 2022 asset management plan. So as I said, the town really worked to improve data accuracy in this asset management plan, especially when it came to replacement costs. So in the last asset management plan, it said you would be spending about $13 million a year on tax funded assets, whereas that has jumped to $22 million a year on tax funded assets within this iteration. Water jumped from 2.6 million to 4.3, and sanitary jumped from 2 million to almost 6. So where we are reviewing this for the 2024 asset management plan is based on the current projected capital needs and then currently available funding. And we looked at the last 3 or 4 years of capital spending to provide some averages of how much tax is being collected, what is being allocated to capital projects. It does show that you're spending about $7 million a year of what we're calling sustainable funding. So sustainable funding sources are taxes, sustainable grants that are expected to be there in a recurring fashion. So that is your Canadian Community Building Fund, or formerly gas tax, and your OSIF funding. What we aren't including here are any one-time grants. So if there was a particular project that received a conditional grant, that is not considered in this calculation because it can't be relied upon in the future. So with the current spending of about $7 million, it does show a deficit of $25 million a year. Or put in other words, the assets are currently funded at 22% of their long-term capital requirements. So this is where the 2025 asset management plan will come into play. These numbers are based on the ideal. This is based on, of our projections, we are going to target 100% funding. We are going to replace that pickup truck every 10 years on the dot. We're never going to stretch anything out. What we are currently working through as part of the 2025 asset management plan is what happens in the long run if we don't get to that 100% funding. What if we strive to do better, but maybe that looks like getting to 50% of the ideal funding? Maybe that looks like getting to 70% of the ideal funding, because we know that that's a really far stretch to jump from a current spending level of 7 million to 32. So we want to make sure that as we're looking forward, we're balancing those financial constraints with the needs of the infrastructure that the town already owns. So this is a snapshot of each asset category's annual capital requirement, meaning how much in theory you should be spending every year versus how much available funding there is for that asset category. So you can see here that they are all deficient. They're all spending less than the ideal, but some are worse than others. So you are investing almost $3 million a year into the road network, whereas you're only investing about $500,000 into the sanitary network. So the farther behind you are, the more likely you are to accumulate what we call an asset backlog, which just means that more and more things are past their expected replacement date. And we don't want that to snowball into a situation where we don't know how we're going to get out of it. So the next slide, I'll be talking about reinvestment rates, and I just want to give a brief overview as to what that means. So a reinvestment rate is a percentage, and a target reinvestment rate is how much should we be spending each year divided by the total replacement cost of that asset category. So if you take one pickup truck as an example, and you expect it to last 10 years, and it's going to cost $100,000 to replace, well, you should be putting away 10% of that every year. So that target reinvestment rate is 10%. And the actual reinvestment rate is how much capital funding you're putting towards that asset, regardless of what's recommended. How much are you actually putting towards it, divided by the total replacement cost? So maybe you're stretching it out a little bit, so you're not actually putting away that $10,000 a year, and you're only putting away $7,000. So then that's 7% actual reinvestment rate. So these percentages have to do with the overall replacement cost of a asset category. So the longer an asset lasts, the lower the reinvestment rate needs to be. So if a pipe is expected to last 100 years, you only have to reinvest 1% a year. If a pickup truck is only going to last 10 years, you have to reinvest 10%. So this is a graph showing the target reinvestment rates versus the actual reinvestment rates. So as at a portfolio level, the target reinvestment rate is to either spend or save 2.3% of the portfolio every year, whereas the town is currently reinvesting about 0.5%. And you can see here each of the respective categories and where they stand. So some are better than others, but we are falling behind on all of the asset categories. And lastly, we have the financial strategy. So if you were to target that 100% ideal funding, what does that look like? So for we've broken this down into tax funded, water rate funded, and sanitary rate funded, because in theory they should be self-sustaining for your utilities, paying for themselves. So we separate those out. So for all three options, we have proposed reaching an ideal level of funding over 20 years. So if you were to reach that ideal, it would require an annual increase in taxes of 3.2% every year for those 20 years. Now, that is in addition to any new buildings or new initiatives that you would be bringing forward. This is only talking about existing infrastructure. For water, we would recommend an annual increase of 2.4% on those rates, and sanitary would be an annual increase of 4.9%. So as I mentioned earlier, these are for 100% funding ideal scenarios. So with the 2025 iteration, these projections will change based on what funding level we are going to target as part of those proposed levels of service. So in conclusion, we have some recommendations and some next steps. The recommendations include reviewing and refining the asset inventory, wanting to make sure that it's as accurate as possible so that we can make accurate future projections. That would involve implementing a data governance strategy to make sure that there's consistency across multiple departments. Developing an established cycle for updating assets for items such as conditions and replacement costs, and reviewing all of the expected useful lives to make sure that they still make sense given the state of the current assets. Our next priority is to prepare for the 2025 requirements in OREG 58817. And we are already working towards those proposed levels of service requirements. And it's always a good recommendation to develop a long-term external communication strategy to engage the public on asset management, saying, if we were to cut anywhere, where would be the areas to cut? Or, no, this area is really important to me and I'm willing to pay more to make sure that this asset or this service stays the way it is. And lastly is continuous improvement and regular review. Asset management plans need to be treated like a living document because they change as conditions improve, as capital projects are completed. You want to make sure that you're keeping track of any of those changes and making sure that this plan doesn't just stay on a shelf and is never referred to. And accordingly, the yearly capital operating budget should include funding for assessment of town assets and regular maintenance to ensure that you're getting as much time and as much value out of your assets as you possibly can. So with that, that is all that I have for my presentation, but I am happy to take questions from Mayor and Council.
Very much. Council, any questions for our administration or our consultant? Deputy Mayor Shepley.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. The first one will be, given that 66% of the assets weren't able to be assessed, how confident are we in the accuracy of this plan?
For conditions, what I would say is that conditions really affect the time blocks of when costs are incurred, but it doesn't necessarily impact what the recommendation is for annual spending. So I would say take within the plan all of the 10-year capital plans or like that 80-year forecast with a grain of salt for how much you're supposed to be spending in the next 5 years versus the next 10 years. For those conditions, the ones that were using age-based, it really depends on the asset category, because for things like water mains, they are really difficult to assess. And it tends to be if they're expected to last 75 years. Well, if you're 37 years into it, it's probably pretty accurate that it's somewhere in the, good to fair condition. Whereas we find fleet and equipment to be quite heavily reliant on condition assessments, because we've seen a pickup truck that's only a couple of years old but has been heavily abused is going to be in poor condition, or a pickup truck that gets used seasonally by summer students and only gets a couple thousand miles on it a year can be in very good condition 10 years down the road. So I would say it very much depends on the category, but condition information is always better than age. So.
Wow. Okay, there we go. My mic was acting out. Sorry. Just a couple more questions. Was there anything high risk that was flagged in the process of this report that we should be aware of?
I think that is an area for improvement is the risk planning. In the appendix, you can see risk profiles and how they were set up. I would say that is where the condition information really comes into play, and we would need more recent condition information to accurately flag the highest risk assets. Where you will want to focus from a risk perspective is the health and safety assets. So I would say focusing on water that is going to impact public safety and bridges. Whereas if a road is in fairly bad condition, you get a lot of complaints and there's potholes. Whereas if a bridge is in very bad condition and you risk either shutting down that bridge or having a collapse, those are very different outcomes. So I would say focusing on assets that have a health and safety component is most appropriate.
Okay. And then my last question, currently, what do we currently put towards this plan on a yearly basis to what the recommendation currently?
Chair, so there was a slide that dictated that, I believe it was 16. And so currently, 6.9 million is dedicated from our funds being grant money or taxation. And the requirement is 32 million. So there's a deficit of approximately 25 million.
I was talking more about the recommendation is, I think it's 2.7% increase. Is that that's year over year is in order to get there? Do we have a current amount that we automatically build in each year? Do you understand what the question is now better?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are not at the 2.7%. What we've been striving for is a minimum of 1%. And that has been the roads levy. So it's varied over the past few years in a range of 0.5% up to 1.5% since this term of council. Fire Blaze.
Thank you through the chair. I have a couple of questions. Looking like this doesn't look good for anybody watching. None of this looks good. But when we're looking at, I'm trying to go back to the slide 11, where it's overall condition of the asset portfolio, and it gives us a range from very good to very poor. Is there a list that we can look at that? What is the very poor? Like, we have buildings and facilities, more than half is very poor. Where's that list, and what can we look at? Is that something that a resident can go take a look at, or council can take a look at? What's the list of our assets? Do we have that?
So the town does have a centralized asset registry in a software called Citywide, and I would direct that towards the administration. There are thousands of assets within that repository, so it's not something that I would recommend just printing off a spreadsheet. But the software certainly has reports that can be easily printed showing what is in the worst condition. For specifically facilities, it did appear that the condition assessments were quite dated. So again, a room for improvement there for data reporting, for getting more accurate assessments. And I do want to point out that just because we are recommending condition assessments doesn't mean that you have to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a consultant going out and doing a condition assessment. It can be your facility maintenance person going out and saying, okay, let's give this a 1 to 10, with, let's say it's a roof. Are the shingles in like brand new, great condition, or are they on their last legs? Give it a 10 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10. That level of condition assessment can be extremely helpful. But sometimes municipalities can get caught up that we have to do this big in-depth consultant-led condition assessment that's super formalized in order to get value from it. And that's certainly not the case.
Thanks, through the chair. I'm gonna ask this question Councillor Hammond gave me because it's on the same page. Is the high school listed in our building and facilities? Is the high school listed there as an asset that is probably very poor? Like how much? That's a question.
I don't have the detailed inventory with me right now, but that is certainly something that we can get back to you on.
Okay. So we would be looking, if the high school's worth a couple $1 million, that's a big one. We're supposed to, so looking at this, the recommendation is to get the target reinvestment rate of 2.3%. Is that accurate? I just want to confirm that because Deputy Mayor Shepley said 2.7 and I was confused as to where 2.7 came from. What are we looking to get out of this report?
So currently the recommended there's a couple different numbers here, so I want to make sure that we're referring to the same one. So the reinvestment rate is the percentage of your total asset portfolio replacement costs that you should be targeting to reinvest every year. That number is 2.3%, and that you're currently at 0.5. The other number is the recommended dedicated tax increase in order to get to that ideal funding level. And that number is 3.2% over annually over 20 years.
Through the chair. So 3.2% is what we're looking to get to. And that's the tax funded. So I'm looking now at slide 20. This is your financial strategy. Tax funded, we're looking at 3.2%, water rate funded 2.4%, and sanitary rate funded 4.9%. We're essentially looking to increase taxes, or we're increasing our residents' user rates and taxes by 10%. Am I wrong?
Through the chair, no, you're correct. So that is exactly what the plan is saying, 3.2% every single year over 20 years. That's what the plan is recommending. We are not adopting that tonight, right? So this is basically based on 100% funding. If we were to say we need to fund everything in the plan to its entirety, that's what we'd have to do over 20 years. What we know is that's not realistic. And what we plan to present in July is a realistic funding plan to council. So we're seeing some municipalities basically give goals of, we want to be 50% funded, right? We have to come up with what that benchmark is. So we're looking at local municipalities, what are comparators doing, what's realistic, right, for residents as well as council. And so that is coming forth in July. This is best case scenario. We're going to fund absolutely everything at today's cost. Is that clear? Sorry. Yeah.
That's very clear. So I just want to be clear tonight. What are we going to be like? I want to be clear what we're approving. I do not want to approve this. I don't want anybody watching or hearing about this to think that we are approving a 10% increase in rates and taxes. Can you just, very layman's terms, tell us what we're approving tonight?
So this report is required by the province to be accepted by council. That does not mean that there is any obligation to follow the plan. So this is meant to be a piece of information that allows council to make informed decisions. So there is no obligation by accepting this plan as information that you must do anything in the plan. This would be the same as adopting or accepting an infrastructure master plan that came to you as information. So this is meant to be just a piece of information that council can use in their toolbox and for their consideration during budget deliberations. But there is no commitment by accepting this report. And there is no obligation, like through the province or anything, to meet these recommended numbers.
Sweet, then Director Drusevich, and then I have Councillor Guerin.
Yeah, Mayor Bonnie, just quick, just to add on what Alexa was just mentioning. Please remember, this has only been in place in terms of legislative for about 10 years or so. So there's municipalities that weren't putting any money in for capital projects, right? So that's why it's legislated now that the province wants to see that municipalities have plans. Here's a plan. Doesn't mean you're going to get to, like Director Drusevich said, 100%, but it's something, some goals to strive for. Because without it, there's municipalities where their infrastructure is just crumbling. That's why it became legislated, and that's why the province wants it. We have to submit something so they know that we are doing something, we have a plan. That's why it was legislated. So just some context to go to Councillor McGuire's blaze that, yeah, we're not approving it. It's kind of a roadmap. Here's where we would like to be. We know realistically this is where we can go, but at least the province knows we're doing something.
Through the chair, just to expand on that. So one of the largest grant streams we get, which was referenced in this presentation, is CIF on an annual basis. So one good thing that should come out of the update of this plan is I would expect that number should increase. And why I say that is because it is based on the current replacement value of our assets. So you saw the drastic jump from 690 million upwards to over $1 billion. That gets reported directly to the province, and that's how they disperse their funding. So what this is showing is to the province, we have needs that are far exceed what we're able to fund. So in a perfect world, I would hope to see that funding increase. I don't mark my words though, because I have no idea, you know, there's elections and everything else. So I don't know what the funding looks like, but based on their formula, because our replacement value is going up so greatly, that's how the grant formula should work.
And then I have a comment myself.
But through the mayor, yeah, so it's a very detailed report. It's a great look at our own backyard. It's a great awareness piece. I mean, when it comes to the financial strategy part of it, I mean, in a perfect world, I mean, they're just making us aware that, you know, if we, in a perfect world, that's the type of funding we'd have to put into this to maintain it. I would love to see up the road a comparison of our asset portfolio condition compared to other similar sized municipalities as ours. Like I'm looking at the under the asset portfolio conditions like roads. I'm pretty sure all municipalities our size or even bigger struggle with putting the money into the roads that needs to be put into roads. So I'm not surprised with seeing some of these numbers, even the buildings facilities. I'm not too surprised about that either. And then with respect to the 64% assets in fair or better condition, it'd be nice to know, like, I mean, you could say 64%, is that, you know, comparable to other municipalities? Is that a good number? And what really makes up that 64%? I mean, you could have a lot of lesser in assets that are not as meaningful as roads and that making up that 64%. So it'd be nice to know, like, of that 64%, is it that are in fair or better condition? What are those assets? But I think the report overall is good. And if it's just a matter of accepting it and us being aware and having some sort of a roadmap, then I think it's a good tool.
And you asked the one question that I had too is, well, how do we compare with other municipalities our size? I think that there's enough questions from council to administration that when we get this report back in July, if we could have more information on, you know, for example, we have the Fire Station 3 that could be falling off this plan at some point. We also have Gesto that could be falling off this plan at some point. Just having a little more detail might help us. I feel like in former terms of council, we talked about asset management a lot more because it was new. And this one, we haven't really dove that deep into it. And I think we really should a little bit more. The other thing is looking for my notes. Sorry, any other members of council before we do have a couple minutes? Councillor Guerin, you have one more?
No, through you, just along that same line, I was just wondering, I'd like to know if there's anything like any similar trends that other municipalities are experiencing with their asset management plans that we are. We might find that maybe since COVID or maybe since the last ones we've done, there's a similar trend. So just be nice to know those types of things.
Oops, I never turned.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, sorry, go ahead.
Anecdotally, just from my experience with the municipalities that I am working for, we have seen a quite drastic jump in replacement costs post-COVID. Just the cost of construction is far outpacing inflation. So that is where having the most up-to-date replacement costs is really important, because we have had quite a few clients relying on, oh, well, we had replacement cost information from 2019, and they go out to tender and it comes back double what they were expecting. So keeping up with today's construction costs, which can be very difficult, but having a review of those replacement costs every year can really be helpful. But we are seeing that jump across the board, especially as we go into these 2024 and 2025 plans, and we're updating information from previous asset management plans.
So I pulled up, along with the lines of what Councilor McGuire Blaze was saying, like, I hope residents are listening to, you know, we don't want to increase this all at once. We have 3 people watching this right now. And I guess it's kind of frustrating because this is such an important topic for our residents, for our community to understand. Of course, we don't want to, in a day, fund it from, you know, 0.5 to 100%, but it's one of those things where we pay now or we pay later. And, you know, in the last term of council, we had 2 years where we had a 0% tax increase, and we're still catching up to that. So I encourage residents to watch this, and hopefully we can all tell residents that they really need to watch meetings like this to get a true understanding. Especially, we hear everybody talk about our sanitary bills, how we have high wastewater rates, but you can see that it costs money to repair. So really important. At this point, I will look for a mover and a seconder that the presentation by Alexa Weld, Senior Asset Manager Advisor Team Lead regarding the 2024 Asset Management Plan be received. Moved by Councillor Guerin, supported by Councillor Hammond. Any questions? All in favor? That's carried unanimously. And looking for another motion that we receive the Capital Works and Asset Management Report be received and approved as presented, and the findings from the 2024 Asset Management Plan be incorporated into the annual budget process to ensure sufficient funds are available for capital projects. Moved by Councillor Verbeek and Councillor Hammond. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried. I'm also wondering if we can get the public presentation from our consultants put onto our website. Okay, thank you. At this time, looking for a mover and a seconder that we adjourn. Councillor Guerin, Councillor Hammond, all in favor. And that is carried.